Hello? Question? Okay. Hello, guys. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good and you?
I am doing well. Okay, just give me a minute. I saw that the tutor had joined the lecture. That's why I had started the recording, but I see here, I'm not sure, maybe it was network or something. I don't see him anymore. Just give me a minute. I'll come back to you in a minute.
Good evening. Good evening. How are you? I hope you all had a very good weekend. Today we are going to discuss on risk management framework and measuring the case study. I hope everyone is hearing me. I had some network challenges, but I eventually connected. So I hope you are all hearing me. So we are going to do our case study on risk management framework and measuring. The case study of the Fukushima disaster. I guess I guess everyone managed to have a look and take a chance to read through the case study. So we are not going to go through the case study. We are actually going straight to the questions. So starting with question 1.1. Using an appropriate diagram, discuss the risk appetite of the government organizations responsible for the oversight of the nuclear facility. So yeah, we are going to discuss the risk appetite. But before we discuss the risk appetite, we can just have a look on the government organizations, some few government organizations in the world which are responsible for the management and oversight of nuclear plants. You see that the nuclear power plants they are very risky in nature because of the type of energy they use, the nuclear energy. So they are highly regulated across the world. So we have the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a UN organization, which is responsible for all the nuclear plant organizations across the world. So you will find that the regulators or the nuclear organizations in different countries, in most countries, are affiliates of the International Atomic Energy Agency. In Canada, they have what they call the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Australia, they have Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency. In Japan, there's Nuclear Regulation Authority. In the UK, there's UK Office for Nuclear Regulation. We also have the US Nuclear Regulation Commission. And here in South Africa, we have the National Nuclear Regulator. So these are some of the nuclear regulators across the world. These are found in almost every country with a nuclear power plant. It's regulated by the government. So the National Nuclear Regulator of South Africa just in brief is mandated to provide for the protection of persons, which include the public and the workers, and also the protection of property and environment against nuclear damage as the competent authority for nuclear regulation in South Africa. In carrying out these regulations mandate, the National Nuclear Regulator ensures that policy guidelines and principles relating to radioactive waste management are supported for purpose of ensuring safety. The requirements relating to the management of radioactive waste are assessed in compliance of National Nuclear Regulator authorization orders is monitored. So these are some of the mandates of the National Nuclear Regulator of South Africa. So in carrying out their mandates, these regulators should develop and should have a risk appetite. So we are going to discuss the risk appetite in relation to this national, with these national nuclear regulators in general. So to start with, we would like to define what is a risk appetite. We have compiled about 4 definitions, different definitions of risk appetite from different organizations. According to the IRM, the risk appetite is the amount of risk that the organization is willing to seek or accept in the pursuit of long-term objectives. Then in the ISO guideline, 73, we define a risk appetite as the amount and type of risk that an organization is willing to pursue or retain. The Orange Book of Risk defined the risk appetite as the amount of risk that an organization is prepared to accept, tolerate, or be exposed to at any point in time. The CIIA, its definition, the risk appetite is the level of risk that is acceptable to the board or management. This may be set in relation to the organization as a whole or for different groups of risk at an individual risk level. So a risk appetite can be set for the sector. It can be set as part of the organization, and maybe as part of the different or individual risk levels. For example, at a business unit level or a department level. So you find out that in the same organization, we might have different risk appetite depending on the branch or the business unit or department of that organization. They might have a different risk appetite. So from the definition, the risk appetite is the total value of the corporate resources that the board or of the organization is willing to put at risk. Most organizations have not determined the value they should risk, which is the risk appetite, or will calculate how much value is actually at risk. The capability of the organization to take different types of risk. Risk appetite will ensure that organizations does not put too much or too little value at risk. So it is important for an organization to know its risk appetite so that it will determine how much level of investment or finance or the value of the organization which it should put at risk comfortably. So it is important for every organization to be aware of its risk appetite. The portion of risk appetite that is associated with opportunities can be considered to be the opportunity investments that the organization is willing to embrace. So the question requires us to use a diagram to to describe a risk appetite for an organization which is responsible for regulating the nuclear power plants. So it can be used to describe this risk appetite. So I've used this diagram of risk appetite, which shows the likelihood and impact of risk. Likelihood is on the x-axis and the impact on the y-axis. The diagram is in 4 different portions with 4 different colors. So I'll try to describe the risk appetite of a regulator of a nuclear power plant using this diagram. So the diagram illustration represents risk appetite or exposure and capacity for the organization responsible for the oversight of the nuclear facility. Usually these organizations, they are risk averse. So the risk appetite, you find that it is low. They usually want to take risks which have a low impact. So, or maybe they will put in regulations and guidelines, which we would, a large extent, try to minimize or mitigate the amount of risk these nuclear power plants are exposed to. So they are risk averse in nature. Risk appetite is illustrated by way of shaded square on the risk matrix. So the whole shaded area is showing the risk appetite of this organization. So we have that dotted line. The dotted line shows the optimum risk exposure or the optimum risk appetite that the organization is willing to take. So you'll find that these organizations are willing to take risks which are which have a low probability of occurring, even if the probability, even if the impact is high, but if the probability of occurring is low, they are willing to take those risks. But if the probability is high and the impact is also high, they avoid those types of risks. So we have the continuous solid line, which shows ultimate risk capacity. So these organizations will not want to take risks which are above that ultimate risk capacity. They will rather take risks which are below that. But the optimum risk level is denoted by the dotted curve. That curve shown by the broken line. The medium shade area represents the situation where the organization is comfortable with taking the risk. And the lighter areas represents the cautious and concerned zones where management judgment is required before the risk is accepted. And the risk shown in the darkest area are critical risk, and this risk will only be accepted when there is a business imperative. So these risks shown in this dark area, this organization will try to avoid. And if there is an imperative business case, the board and management will consider to look into the risk and maybe to authorize the undertaking, which include those high risk levels. So, yeah, this is what I have on this question 1.1. Do we have any questions?
Yes, question. How are you?
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
good.
I'm good as well. I'm having a little bit of concern in terms of drawing that drawing that you were showing us. Where exactly can we find that template for that drawing?
Oh, okay. I did find this template on the internet. If you search for templates for risk appetites, you will find a number of these templates. But the idea is to look for a template which match the risk. But there are a number of these diagrams on the internet. Or maybe if you are good in drawing, you can attempt to draw one.
Okay, thank you, Kosha.
Okay. Do we have any other question? Okay, let's go to question 2.2. The case study is a well-known incident that took place in 2011 in Japan, and it has been mentioned that this could have been avoided. Propose how the use of risk management could have been prevented. So we want to look on the risk management ideas which could have been used to prevent the occurrence of this disaster. So, as an introduction, you can start by just highlight some few points on the background of the disaster. The Fukushima accident was preventable if international best practices and standards had been followed. If there had been international reviews and had common sense prevailed in the interpretation of pre-existing geological and hydrodynamic findings. So according to different researches which have been done, they find out that there were a number of issues which caused this disaster. For example, there was insufficient attention which had been given to evidence of large tsunamis inundating the region. Earlier, Japanese research suggested that large earthquakes could occur anywhere along the subduction zone. So if you look at the site or the area where this Kanban was located, it's an earthquake prone zone. So these guys are saying there was insufficient attention given that they already they were aware that the region is prone to earthquakes. There were also substantial inadequacies in the Japan nuclear regulatory structure. So the regulatory authority for Japan nuclear was lagging behind in terms of putting in place standards and the regulation to make sure that the facility is well secured in terms of hazards and risk. The hazard analysis to calculate the maximum probable tsunami Daesh appeared to have methodological mistakes. So the processes and methods used to calculate the occurrences in terms of probability and magnitude of these tsunamis, it was found that there was some mistakes in the methods and strategies used. Also, the magnitude of the design tsunami triggered earthquake affecting this region of Japan had been grossly undermined. Like I said, these guys, they already knew of the riskiness of the region in terms of tsunami and earthquakes, but they were not implementing enough or adequate risk management strategies to manage or to avoid the occurrences of this disaster. So if we look at risk management as a solution, suggested solution to this disaster, we should look at risk management in a holistic way, where we should view the risk management process from identification to control and review. The whole process was supposed to be taken into consideration. So there's risk identification, measurement, and assessment of risk. The major objective of identification is to avoid the unintentional or unconscious retention of risk that occurs when the source of performance variability remains undiscovered, and therefore not part of the risk assessment or management system. So there was need to do a proper risk identification, risk measurement, and risk assessment for these risks. It seems that this company was ignorant in terms of identifying different types of risks which could have affected the company. In the measurement part, it seems that the magnitude of the tsunamis in the region was way more than what they expected. So they didn't do adequate risk measurement and assessment in this regard. So it was necessary for the company to invest in risk identification, risk measurement, and risk assessment. It was also necessary for them to determine an appropriate risk management technique. So to some extent, these guys, they identified this, but they didn't put in place the appropriate risk management techniques to try and avoid this risk. Generally, there are three generic categories of risk management techniques, which include risk reduction, risk retention, and risk transfer. So within these generic categories, they were supposed to implement some controls, some types of controls to try and manage or minimize the risk of this tsunamis and the probability of floods. So after taking into account the different strategies, the next issue was for the implementation, because a strategy would not work if it's not implemented. So they were supposed to implement different strategies to manage these risks. We are going to look at some few strategies which could have been used in avoiding the occurrence of the disaster. So after one, it's supposed to have maybe a periodic review of these implemented strategies. The purpose of monitoring and feedback mechanism is to help the utility recognize if an existing strategy needs to be informed. So they were supposed to do periodic monitoring and review of the risk management strategies which were in place to ascertain if these strategies are enough to cater for the risk, because as you know, risk is always changing. There are always new types of risk which come into the organization. So this process is important to continuously monitor if the risk management strategies in place are still adequate. Another step is on communication and organizational culture. Organizational culture in main nuclear power plants is now rapidly changing, providing organizations with an opportunity to integrate a risk management way of thinking into a new business environment of the firm. When the organizational culture is supportive, employees are more likely to be motivated and committed in the performance of risk activities, and less likely to be disruptful of management that stresses within the organization should be monitored, and that employee commitment leads to organizational culture. So to some extent, there was no culture of risk management at this company, as was evident by the ignorance of some very important risk issues which were identified, but they didn't take action to implement at least a strategy to minimize the effects of these risks. So the culture, basically, we can say this organization, there was no culture of risk awareness and risk supportive. So this is basically the risk management process. So this process of risk management, if it was implemented in a more serious way, this disaster could have been avoided. Now let's look at some few techniques which could have been implemented by the Tokyo Electric Power Company. So I've identified the two categories of these strategies. The one is engineering measures and international best practice. Tokyo Electric Power Company and Japanese regulators should have taken well understood and straightforward engineering measures to better protect the Fukushima nuclear power station before the accident occurred. So we are going to look at the different engineering measures which could have been implemented. On international best practice, the Nuclear Safety Authority and the nuclear power plant owners in several countries were establishing requirements and configuring nuclear power plants in ways that could potentially have saved the Fukushima nuclear station from disaster had they been repeated. So we are going to look at engineering measures and international best practices. On the basis of international knowledge accumulated during the 4-decade operating lifetime of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station and put into practice at nuclear power plants elsewhere, the TEP Kaman, encouraged by Japanese regulators, could have taken some or all of the following actions to have protected the plants against the tsunami. The first measure is to moving the emergency diesel generator and other emergency power sources to higher ground on the plant site. When the Fukushima Daiichi station was constructed, the emergency diesel generators and emergency batteries were installed on the floor inside the plant building to afford protection against earthquakes. Ventilation ducts in the compartments where this equipment was located were not waterproofed. Moving this emergency power equipment to a higher ground, safety experts said, would not have increased its vulnerability to seismic shock, provided it was fixed on a platform designed to resist earthquakes. So these emergency diesel generators, they were too low. They were at the floor, so it was prone to the risk of flood. So the idea was to moving this power equipment on a higher ground and also to waterproof the ventilation ducts so that they cannot be affected by floods. Another engineering measure was to establish a watertight connections between emergency power supplies and the plant. So there was no watertight connections. So these power supplies were exposed to floods. Another measure was to build dikes and seawalls to protect against a severe tsunami. So they could have built some seawalls in the sea to protect or to limit the risk of tsunami. Also, they could have installing emergency power equipment and cooling pumps in dedicated bunkered watertight buildings or compartments. The last measure on engineering was assuring that seawater supply infrastructure is robust and providing additional robust sources to save as the plant's ultimate heat sink. So these are the few measures which could have been implemented with regard to engineering. There were also a possibility of implementing international best practices, which the researchers generally agree that they were not taken into consideration at this power plant. Some regulatory bodies outside of Japan reassessed the safety of installations in the event of extreme flood hazard, a station blackout, and the loss of ultimate heat sink. In the view of safety experts participating in such assessments, had Japan acted on these developments, the plants could have been survived the tsunami. So the international best practices propose that they should build a defense against a station blackout. Compared to some nuclear power plants in other countries, the units at Fukushima Daiichi were considerably less protected against the loss of internal and external power on the site. Most of this equipment was water-cooled and not air-cooled, as in the case of more modern nuclear power plants, and is also suggested by different regulatory authorities. In the USA, Nuclear Regulatory Commission required that a nuclear power plant withstand a complete loss of AC power for between 4 and 8 hours, depending on the specific conditions. So these guidelines were not followed at this power station to improve plant protection against station blackouts. So there's a program instituted by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission of the United States. So the Japanese regulatory authority should have been also maybe consider this protection program implemented by other countries. With regard to loss of ultimate heat sink, without an alternative heat sink, the plant was left without a way to cool its reactors. So the post-Fukushima examinations by European Union country regulators testify to an absence of national requirements for providing backup alternative heat sinks to cope with the severe external event. So there were no backup. The protection against severe flooding. The NISA and TEP company failed to heed relevant warnings from elsewhere in the world about the French authorities revealed that dikes were too low and that rooms containing emergency equipment were insufficiently protected from flooding. Regulators could have ordered to identify all phenomena that could cause flood and to release site-specific flood management protection with regard to loss of site power, communication, and heat sinks, including raised dikes and walls. The protection against flooding and other external events are assessed during the periodic safety review process for many nuclear power plants worldwide. Tsunami risk assessment. A growing divergence between their practices and evolving international standards should have alerted NISA and TEPCO to potential problems in their approach to tsunami risk assessment. In 2003, the IAEA published a safety guide on flood hazards for nuclear power plant, which contains guidance concerning all factors that must be considered in assessing the risk from a tsunami. The Japanese methodology did not meet this guidance since it focused only on evaluating tsunami run-up and ignored other salient factors such as the effect of the debris. Japan should have been well aware of how far its own practice was lagging behind international standards, and this should have prompted remedial action. So, to some extent, the Japanese authorities were not up to date in terms of the regulatory frameworks and guidelines with regard to nuclear power plants. So the power plant was vulnerable to a number of risks, Before we move to question 1.3, do we have questions? Do we have any questions? Okay. Let's move to question 1.3. Propose the different techniques that can be used to identify the risk in the case study and justify your response. So in this question, we are going to look at the first step of the risk management process, which is risk identification, and relating it to the case study. We are going to propose different types of techniques which could have been used to identify this risk. We have mentioned in the previous question that the risk identification process was not considered in an effective manner. So we are going to propose ways and techniques that could have been used to identify the risk. In the management of a nuclear power plant, risk can come from many sources, which can be production processes, training processes, social responsibility, including communication with the public, outside influences, for example, natural disasters, and also economic factors. We can have these risks coming from the financial processes, just to name a few. Many different sources of information can be used to identify sources of risk, such as industry, specific or generic risk exposure checklists, flow charts, critical processes, examination of contracts, physical inspection, analysis of financial statements, employee, contractors, or regulators interviews. So there are a number of different ways where these risks can be identified. We are going to discuss just a few. So the few techniques that we have come up with is a probabilistic flood assessment method. So when selecting the flooded area, the entire power plant should be viewed from the perspective of a flooding event, and the areas that can be affected by flooding should be independently defined. The purpose of the flooded area selection is to identify the major flooding event scenarios that affect the stability of the power plant by dividing the sites into areas that a flooding accident would have significant impact on and areas that would not be significantly affected. The design data of the power plant should be reviewed, and the physical arrangement of the buildings, the location, capacity of potential flood sources, and the flood path should be identified. So by this technique, the idea is to look on the plant to find areas which can be affected more by the risk of flood, and areas which are less prone to this risk. And after identifying these areas, then different strategies to manage the floods could be implemented. So this idea is probability of occurrence of floods to calculate the extent to which the plant is prone to the floods. Another technique which I've noted is the accident frequency analysis or accident systems analysis. The SAFEIT assessment is a broad term describing a systematic process aimed at ensuring that all relevant SAFEIT requirements are met, including the principal requirements, plant equipment requirements, and plant systems design and requirements. More generally, SAFEIT assessments can cover all aspects of the siting, design, construction, operation, and decommissioning of the nuclear power plant that are relevant to SAFEIT. So this technique will look on the SAFEIT side of the plant in general for all the processes, just to analyze if the SAFEIT measures are considered and taken into consideration in all the processes. So this is one of the techniques that can be used. Another technique is the identification of environmental hazard. In many organizations, there are the internal frameworks which are used for the identification and management of environmental hazards. For example, the British Energy in the UK, there's such a framework that requires each nuclear power plant to provide an inventory of potential environmental hazards and their magnitudes. So they will have a checklist of environmental hazards that can affect the nuclear power plant, and they will ascertain a magnitude, like to what extent does this environmental hazard can cause a risk to the power plant. This decision framework establishes the number and integrity of barriers required to avoid the hazard. This risk-informed approach ensures that resources are focused in a consistent fashion where they can provide the most benefit. Another technique which can be used to identify the risks in a power plant is the revised reactor oversight processing. The risk-informed performance-based assessments, inspections, and enforcement on the reactors. So there should be maybe periodic assessment and reviews and inspection of the reactors to see if they are functioning in a proper way. The revised reactor oversight process includes 7 cornerstones of SAFEIT, 19 performance indicators, a baseline inspection program, a significance determination process, enforcement program, and an action matrix. So this is a process which is used to assess the safety of the reactors. So it was designed by the UK regulatory authority approach to the assessment of risk on the part of the reactors. Another technique is the use of computer models and systems. So there are systems and softwares which can be used to assess the probability of occurrence of these natural disasters using probabilistic models. So the nuclear power plants operators must design systems, structures, and components to withstand natural disasters such as earthquakes and floods. There's a use of simulation softwares that show to effectively duplicate the results of earlier physical tests at a substantial reduced cost. So these models usually they use secondary data research from other disasters, and they try to simulate the risk surrounding the nuclear power plant with regard to the probability of these natural disasters happening, and also the extent to which these disasters can cause damage to the nuclear power plant. So these simulation methods will suggest, of course, suggest the risk management strategies with regard to their findings. So they will recommend some risk management strategies. So for the identification of commercial risks, there is what is called value at risk, the use of value at risk to identify the risk of the nuclear power plant. So the value of value at risk summarizes the expected maximum loss or waste loss over a target horizon with a given confidence interval. So they will be analyzing to what extent is the company is going to lose given the occurrence of a certain risk or a certain set of different risks. So the calculation of value at risk uses standard statistical techniques to provide a summary measure of financial risk that can be used. So the different risks are measured in terms of the financial effect, and this measure is summarized into one figure, which is called the value at risk. The purpose of this value at risk is to appraise senior management of the risk run by the trading and investment operations, and also to commit better pricing of debt in the market, and also to compare risk activities in diverse markets. One of the quantitative methods for value at risk calculation uses simulation based on historical data. Application of this technique is in nuclear power production is not well developed, but as the industry moves towards the more comprehensive and integrative risk management regime, the value at risk measures will enter the picture because of increased use of derivatives instruments. So although it is not common in the nuclear power plants due to technology and the advancement of different financial instruments in the nuclear power production, the value at risk is slowly gaining significance. So it can be one of the techniques used for the identification of risks. So these were my suggestions, and this is the end of question 1. Do I have any any questions with regard to this particular question, or maybe the whole question one? My assumption is we don't have any questions, so we are moving to question 2. Question 2 reads, any risk management process starts with planning and is then followed by the risk assessment process. Discuss at least 5 inherent risks that should have been identified during the risk management process. Students must clearly specify the risk identifier, risk category, risk description, risk cause and effect. So for us to answer this question, we need to have an appreciation of what is inherent risk, because we are required to identify and discuss the 5 different inherent risks within the case study. So we will start by defining the inherent risk. It refers to the natural risk level in a process that has not been controlled or mitigated in a risk management. The risk control procedures can lower the impact of likelihood of inherent risk, and the remaining risk is shown as the residual risk. So any risk without any mitigation measure is what is called the inherent risk. So let me try to share with you. I've answered this question in Excel. I want to try and share the Excel. Where is my Excel? I'm not finding my Excel. Where is it? Hello, I hope you are seeing my Excel sheet. Are we all seeing?
Yes, we are.
Oh, okay. All right. So we are given then, we are provided with a template which we should use for answering this question. So I'm going to use the same template. So when attempting to this type of a question, we need to look at all the different types of risks that that can affect the nuclear power plant in general. We have different types of risks, some which are mentioned in the case study, and some of the risks are not mentioned. But we need to look at all the risks which the nuclear power plant is exposed to. So my first risk is environmental risk. So to describe this risk category, this is risks which can come from extreme earthquakes, tsunami, or floods. And this risk is caused by underestimated tsunami and natural hazards, or lack of engineering controls within the nuclear power plant. And the effects of this risk, it may result to flooding, which can be catastrophic to a nuclear power plant because it can knock out its electrical systems, disabling its cooling mechanism and leading to overheating and possibly meltdown and a dangerous release of radioactivity. So this was my first category of risk. Then the second category risk which I have identified relates to health and safety. So this risk is a significant release of radioactive materials into the environment, which can cause health hazards to employees and the public. Mainly this risk is caused by failure in the cooling system or overheating and meltdown of the reactors. The effect is radioactive materials and ionizing radiation may be released, potentially posing a health risk for people. Human exposure to radioactive material comes from walking on the contaminated soil or coming into contact with contaminated materials at a nuclear accident site, or from consuming contaminated water, milk, or different type of foods. People may also be exposed to this radioactive material by breathing dust particles in the air that are contaminated. I also identified operational risk. The operational risk, they relate to risk of accidents or errors or anything that can jeopardize the operation of the nuclear power plant within the organization. So these are the operational risks, and they are mainly caused by lack of internal controls, human error, or even harsh working conditions. the effect in the event of an accident, there's a chance that the dangerous radioactive material can be released, and people may be exposed. And there is also danger of accidents which can cause employees and even the public. Accidents can cause damage to employees. So as an operational risk, it can cause damage to employees. Nuclear power plants are also exposed to financial and commercial risks. This relates to loss of the nuclear power project. The whole project can be a failure, maybe by failing to meet its financial needs, financial obligations, or maybe failing to make a profit. Nuclear power plants generally they are capital intensive in nature. There's need for huge sums of money to invest into these projects. So there's a high risk that the returns will not cover the cost of investments. So usually this is caused by movements in the financial variables, such as prices of resources or price of finished product for sale. In this case, the price of electricity can change over time. Currency exchange rates and interest rates can also change. This, to some extent, can create risk for the organization. To some extent, is highlighted in the case, there is also high cost of cleanup in the event of the accident, like the disaster which happened in the case under review. The Japanese government is spending billions and billions of dollars to try and clean up the environment. So this can cause a financial risk to the organization. The effect may include to the reduction of the electricity prices, increase in project costs, or the operating costs, financial losses, and all these are the key to the project success. So the project might fail because of all these financial risks. The fifth category, which I've identified, is the strategic risk, which is basically the fundamental changes in the economic, commercial, or political environment, the outside environment of a company. Shifts in government tax it can cause this strategic risk. Change in environmental spending trends, expropriation, nationalizations of companies, or privatization challenges, changes in the nature of marketplace competition, changes in the public sentiments towards particular lines of business, or even ownership patterns, and regulatory and legal changes in both markets. So all these changes can cause a strategic risk to a nuclear power plant. So this will have an effect to the performance of the nuclear power plant operating environment. So in short, these are the 5 risks, inherent risks, which I have identified with regard to a nuclear power plant. Do I have any questions?
Hi, question.
Yes.
On column G, you've got probabilities and likelihoods. Does this mean, since on point number 1, you said it's likely, so meaning it's likely to happen, or what is the likelihood?
Oh, okay. So what I did is for the question 2, I used the whole question. I used the one Excel sheet. So from G going forward, these are they relate to the next question. So we are going to discuss.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So on part 1, question 2, and we are only discussing the category, description, cause, and effect. But since the question 2.2 is a continuation from question 2.1, I just thought of using the same worksheet. Okay, so let's go to question 2.2. Using the risk register in the previous section, conduct a qualitative risk analysis for these 5 risks by proposing the probability of occurrence and impact of each risk. So you see, we are going to use the same risks. Okay. So we are going to do a qualitative risk analysis for these 5 identified risks. So on qualitative risk analysis, we are going to use the likelihood of the risk occurring, the impact of the risk if it occurs, and the rating. So we are on the likelihood. The likelihood is basically the probability of the risk occurring. So we are given the risk matrix on the last page of the question. So we are just using that risk matrix to come up with the different probabilities and different impacts of the identified risk. Of course, relating to the case, and also some research surrounding the nuclear power plants and the risks involved. So this is a likelihood expectation scale which shows the qualitative probabilities of occurrence for different risks and the description of the frequency. So if you say a certain risk is rare, it means it may only occur in exceptional circumstances, simple processes, no previous incidents of no compliances. Unlikely, it means it could occur at some time, and the probability will be around 25% chance of occurring. A possible incident might occur at some time. The chance of occurring between 25 to 50%, and previous audits or reports or research may indicate that there's a 25% to 50% chance of occurring. When we say it's likely to happen, the probability will be somewhere around 50% and 75% chance of that occurring. And the last level is almost certain, which is 75% and above. So if we say an incident is almost certain to happen, we are saying we have a 75% chance or more that this incident may occur. Okay. We also have a risky, what is called a risk impact scale. The risk impact is the process of assessing the probability consequence of risk event if they are realized. Yes.
We're not moving along with your screen sharing. It's still standing on the on the column G. It's not moving with you.
Oh, it's on the column G.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Let me see. Any changes?
Yes.
Okay. So you see my screenshots.
Yes,
So I was
clear.
Oh, okay. So I was talking about the risk impact scale. So on the impact, you'll be looking at to what extent does the risk affect the operations or the finances of the organization. So according to the risk matrix which is provided, the impact of 5 will reflect an extreme impact. The impact will be catastrophic to the organization. Then we have a major impact which can be highlighted by a level 4. Level 3 is moderate. Level 2 minor, and level 1 insignificant. If a risk is said it's insignificant, it means the impact is is less. Maybe if we take in terms of the financial impact or variability of the finances, maybe there will be a variability of 1%. The financial position of the company is affected to at most 1%. So this risk will be low in terms of the impact. So the risk rating, determine whether or not it is safe enough to continue with the work, or whether we need to adopt additional control measures to reduce or eliminate the risk still further. The rating depends upon the likelihood of an event occurring from most unlikely to most likely, and the severity of the injuries that might arise the event that's occurred. So by rating, rating is just a combination of, we will rate a risk by combining the probability of it occurring and the severity of the injuries that is caused by this risk. So in this case, our rating, we were just multiplying the scale of the risk impact times the scale of risk likelihood. So the higher the rating, it means the risk is high, and there's need to pay more attention to such risk. If the rating is low, then it means the risk might be negligible. So I've come up with 4 different ratings: high. Or let me start from low. Low, from 0 to 5. Every scale which lies between 0 and 5, it means the risk is low in terms of the scale. From 6 to 12 is medium. From 13 to 20 is significant. From 21 to 25, it's high. The maximum rating here is 25 because our likelihood scale, our likelihood to scale, the maximum is 5, and on the impact scale, the maximum is 5. So the maximum rating which we can attain here is 25. That is where we have a probability of almost certain and an extreme impact to the organization. So my first risk, environmental, according to my research theory and also my qualitative analysis, I put a probability of a probability scale of 4, which is likely. It is likely that environmental risks can happen on a nuclear power plant. Mainly basically because if we look at the position of this power plant in the case, you'll find out that it was located on the coastline, and the probability of things like floods tsunamis, earthquake, the probability is high. So the probability is around between 50 and 75%. So the likelihood is I put a likelihood of 4. Then on the impact, provided that this risk occurs, the impact will be catastrophic. So the rating is 20, which is 4 times 5. So 4 times 5 is our rating. On the second risk category of health and safety, the probability is between 25 and 50. It's possible that it's very possible that there's risk of health and safety issues on a power plant, a nuclear power plant. And if these risks occur, the impact will be high. So a scale of 3 multiplied by a scale of 4, the rating will be 12. Operational, the probability is likely that the accident can occur, or maybe some operating issues, accidents and the like. The probability, the impact will be minor, so the rating is 8. On the financial or commercial category, it's possible, and if it happens, the impact will be moderate. The rating there is 9. And on strategic, it's unlikely, mainly because most of these nuclear power plants, they are supported by the government, and in some economies, it's actually the government which runs these nuclear power plants. So the probability that there are changes in government operations, policies, and guidelines is highly unlikely. And if it happens, the significance, the impact will be insignificant. So the rating is 2. So these probabilities and impact, they are qualitative in nature. So it depends on who is doing the analysis, the perception of the person doing the analysis, the background, and the amount of knowledge available. So you find that a different person could give a different in the understanding of the issue. So this is our question 2.2. Do we have any questions with regard to the rating score, the risk rating, the likelihood, the impact, and the rating. Okay. So we can proceed to question 2.3. Question 2.3 reads, using the risk matrix included in Appendix 1, plot the inherent risk on a heat map and discuss what the heat map means. So a risk heat map is a tool used to present the result of a risk assessment process visually and in a meaningful and concise way. Usually on a heat map, there's a use of different colors so that it is presentable. It helps managers to quantify the potential impact of risk event. Helping managers to quantify the potential impact of risk event is one of the most important exercises in the risk management process. So this risk heat map, it will help management to quantify the potential impact of risk, and they will be able to visualize the risk impact. Operational managers often struggle with the concept of materiality and how to define it in both of qualitative and quantitative terms. So these risk heat maps, they will help operational managers to have a better understanding of the materiality when it comes to risk management. The 5x5 heat map diagram below provides an illustration of how the nuclear power plant can map probability ranges to common inherent risk, event likelihood, and a ranking scheme potential impacts. So we are going to look at the heat map. Okay, so this is the heat map. This is our heat map with regard to the identified risks. So for our heat map, we will use the risk scale that we discussed in question 2.2. So according to this heat map, the risk scale, we have a low scale 0 to 5, medium 6 to 12, significant 13 to 20, and high 21 to 25. So on our heat map, we have the impact on our x-axis, likelihood y-axis. So if a risk is likelihood is rare and the impact is insignificant, that risk will have a scale of 1, which is 1 by 1, and the scale is shown by the green part. So if we look at our our identified inherent risks. The first one, environmental risk. We have a risk rating of 20. So on our risk map, our heat map, we have our environmental risk here, which is 20, which means the likelihood of it happening is on scale 4, which is likely, but the impact is extreme. So it is represented by this box. On health and safety, the likelihood is on scale 4, but the impact is moderate. So it's here. It is represented by a scale of 12. So the scale of 12 is in our significant category. Operational risk. Operational risk is likely, but if it happens, the impact will be minor. So it's here in our moderate section, the moderate, which is highlighted by our yellow color. On strategic, it's rare, but if it happens, the magnitude is minor. So it's represented by a scale of 2. A scale of 2 is within our low category, 0 to 5. So it's in our green category, which is low. So basically, this is our heat map. It gives us a clear picture of the different risks, the extent to which they affect the organization in terms of the ranking. So this is the risk mapping. Basically, this is what we call risk mapping. So in attending to different types of risk, you will find that an organization will put less attention to strategic risk because it's in our low category of the heat map. But if you look at the environmental risk and the health and safety risk, the organization will need to invest more in these types of risks because they are represented by a significant scale on our risk, our heat map. They are significant in nature. So there's need to invest more in these types of risks so that we try to reduce the impact, either the impact or the likelihood of these risks. So basically, this is our heat map. Do we have any questions?
No.
Okay. For the sake of our time, we are going to discuss question 3 and question 4 in our next lecture. Thank you for joining. If you don't have any questions, our lecture will end here. Thank you so much. Have a good night and have a blessed week ahead. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, you too.